Oh, and thank you for listening to this video recording here, this screencast. So, in this screencast, I'm going to respond to a couple of email questions about the conference abstract, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a guided reading of one of the abstracts that's already been posted. So, my hope is that this will clear up any questions about the project and give you an idea of what we're looking at. So our first question comes from Sonali, who is slightly confused as to what we're writing about. Are we proposing a possible research question or simply proposing an abstract for a paper analyzing research on a specific topic? So to your question, Sonali, the thing that you really want to focus on here, and I'll just flip over to the question. If we're going to go to Ronnie's example here, which actually would be the one that I was going to use. Uh, well, what is she doing? This paper analyzes how the sexual health perceptions and resulting behaviors of Latinos in modern day America are influenced by factors such as friends, family, and acculturation. Using this analysis, this paper will further consider the importance of having a culturally appropriate, comprehensive sex ed for minority populations such as Latinos. So if we flip back then to your question, you're not really proposing a research question. You are writing an abstract for a paper analyzing research. So what that means is you're going to be proposing a response to a CFP. And actually, if we flip back here, the CFP is for the Journal of Social Issues for an upcoming special issue on reproductive justice. The editors are seeking proposals for papers in order to expand the understanding and justice in sexual and reproductive health issues. So this would be the purpose. So we're trying to create knowledge here. And the idea behind this is that it gives you a chance to use the sources in your annotated bibliography to start to pursue your inquiry question, but without having to write the whole project. So another way to think of it is that you're describing a paper you haven't yet written. So using these resources, I can show blank. So to that, you're not really proposing a research question, you're proposing an abstract for something analyzing the research. Our next question comes from Ronnie, actually. For the conference abstract, you mentioned we should cite relevant sources. I referred to two research papers in my abstract. When talking about these, I simply write the titles of the articles. Should I create a reference pages? Should I include this? Well, here's my response. The short answer is yes, you should create a references page, and text citations really are accomplished by mentioning the titles and author names. So let's go back to the sample here. And there's no references yet, which is fine. She's obviously working on that. Let's take a look at the third sentence. Utilizing peer-reviewed research papers such as Sex Ed and Cultural Values, Experiences, and Attitude of Latina Immigrant Women, this paper will shed light onto the narratives behind sex ed disparities and demonstrate how improving the quality of life with regards to the health of a population requires a largely subjective approach. So what this tells us is, first of all, Ronnie's going to be building on peer-reviewed research papers and gives us an example. Now, in the references section that she's going to add underneath, she can list the author's names and the publication information so we know who wrote this paper and when it was published and where it was published, which will, as other readers of this conference abstract, help us build on her work and, frankly, make a decision whether or not to accept it to a conference, because we'll have the frame of reference to do so then. Showing the references helps us understand the sources that the writer is working with. And so we can say, okay, these are discourse community members. We know these sources. This is working with influential work, so we're going to allow it. Or you can say, oh, this is a paper dealing with a topic from a new perspective. So this is a valuable addition to the discourse community because we now have a valuable outside perspective from a member of our own discourse community. So that's really how you would handle that. And by the way, what I mentioned here in-text citations really are accomplished by mentioning titles and author names. So when you mention a title and author name in a piece of writing, you're documenting your sources. Yes, you need to formalize that in a references or bibliography or works cited, but you're essentially given credit already by mentioning it in the text. And in our purposes here, that's really good enough. So our third question comes from Michaela, who's a little bit worried about writing an abstract for one article or an abstract for multiple articles that all follow the CFP, and she asks about the difference between a scientific abstract and an abstract that you can write responding. So a couple of things here. One, to your first question, should we be writing a new abstract for one article? No, you're not rewriting an abstract for an article that exists already. What you are doing is writing an abstract for multiple articles that follow the CFP. And what you're really doing here is synthesizing those multiple sources into one response to the CFP. Essentially, you're using secondary research to respond to the CFP. So you're saying, currently the discourse community finds whatever, here's how we represent it, and here's how this speaks to the CFP, the concerns in the field. To the difference between a scientific abstract and an abstract for a CFP. So a scientific abstract would be an abstract that would break down the contents of the article. It would summarize the findings, and it would be written with lots and lots and lots of jargon. It would essentially kind of meet the needs of a reader reading for information because they want to know what's in the article. An abstract written responding to a CFP is written for a different reader. That abstract is written for someone who's reading for admission to a conference or a journal, and what they're looking for isn't so much a dense summary, but a proposal of how the project meets the needs of the publication, the discourse community, the sponsoring conference. So what is the contribution that this project offers? So let's continue with Ronnie's abstract now and see where she goes to. So next sentence. Recent research presented in sexual values among Latino youth, measurement, development using a culturally based approach, has highlighted the heightened risk of early pregnancies and STIs in the Latino population in the United States. So, great. One sentence summary of source 2, which follows the one sentence summary of source 1. This paper, meaning the paper that she's proposing, there we go, aims to not only differentiate the disparities between Latino and non-Latino populations with regards to sexual health behaviors and consequences, but rather take it a step further and critically analyze the social factors that create these inequalities. So what she's trying to do here is add a new dimension to what we can assume are the existing findings, right? Current research finds these disparities, but it doesn't yet do this. Now, this is an interesting question of discourse community concerns and values because it's easy to look at the second example here, for instance, critically analyze the social factors, and that has a heavy public health bent to it, or maybe other issues too, other backgrounds too, things like social work or policy making. Whereas this first study that she would kind of mention, differentiate the disparities, that's very much, it's still public health-ish, but it's much more scientific, it's a little more quantitative instead of digging into more of a social analysis. So she's really talking about bringing together two distinct conversations within the same discourse community. This is a great way to propose new scholarship. This paper will show, so now she's presenting her findings, how while family, friends, and acculturation maintain influence the sexual health values of Latinas, it is the sexual education that has the fundamental power to steer individuals to have positive or negative health outcomes, even with other factors influencing their choices. So what's her main finding? Here we go. Now this would be a point where, and Ronnie, you might have to condense your prose a little bit to stay within the word count, but what you might want to do here would be to kind of offer one more sentence, if you can squeeze it in, kind of telling us what the finding is. For instance, why does sex ed have this kind of power? What shows that? So you might have to go back and actually cite a couple of points from the two articles that you mentioned above. The inquiries of the paper will propose a call to action for health educators and healthcare providers. So there's a statement of audience to recognize that due to the culturally rich diversity found in the United States, it's imperative to implement culturally competent sex ed to minority groups such as Latinos in order for improvements to be seen overall health of the population. So that's a great sentence in that it offers us, first of all, a geographic location in the United States. We have a boundary to this conversation, but also a kind of payoff for improvements to be seen. Now, a couple of suggestions here. Instead of just improvements, we might actually name a couple of specific improvements or goals. And we can frame that not in a couple ways. One might be lowering rates. Lowering rates would probably be something mentioned in this article. And you could also then, another improvement might be what then would be the actual human kind of version of lowered rates. Like lower rates might result in longer life, of course, happier life, healthier life. But what comes with that? Things that would be probably culturally based. Happier, healthier people, right, work more, are more productive when they do work, tend to earn a little bit more money, provide a more stable home environment for children if they choose to have children. So we might try to, Ronnie, improve the specificity of some of these claims a little bit. And again, go back to your sources and pull out some of their specific claims and evidence and stakes to kind of show a slightly more specific payoff. I wouldn't change the structure of this. Structurally, this is very strong. The second half from here on through is a little bit wordy, so I would try to shrink my sentences, focus on some sentence level shortening that you might be able to do here. And I'll give you one example. Let me turn on track changes so that you can see what I might do to one sentence here. So something we might do with, let's see, here, let's look at this sentence. So this paper, strong active subject, will show, nice verb. So how and while, these are two words that you're kind of using in place of a more straightforward word here. I forget what part of speech is off the top of my head. What you might actually want to say is we'll show, well, let's just choose one. Let's choose while. We'll show that while. It still is a double word. Let's didn't do that. It didn't really work so well. Okay, let's get rid of while and see if that works better. There we go. We'll show how family, friends, and acculturation maintain influence on the sexual health of Latinos. Sexual education well, let's actually look at this, has the fundamental power to steer individuals to have positive or negative health outcomes, even with other factors including. So this last phrase here, even with other factors, that doesn't change the essential meaning of the sentence, which is that sex ed still has this power. So we can get rid of that. And we can also get rid of this word fundamental. That doesn't really add anything. If you're trying to get it like the most power, you can also say sexual education can be most influential. Actually, would say the most influential factor in steering individuals to have positive or negative health outcomes. So you see how I shrunk that sentence a little bit by getting rid of some of the words that don't change the essential meaning. That's one of the most important things you can do is ask yourself, what's the essential meaning of the sentence, and what parts of the sentence can I get rid of that won't change the essential meaning? So you might want to do some just revision to tighten it like that and then bring in some more specifics. And I would say that that would apply to other projects as well. And I'll be able to give a better look at those once they're all posted. So I'm going to conclude this video now. I've gone on a little bit longer than I intended. Any other questions, of course, please feel free to send them at me. And I promise I will be in touch tomorrow with some additional feedback on a couple other drafts to give you some idea of how those might work. Have a good night.